Well, hello, everybody. I am Pastor Jeremy Bannister, and woohoo, there is Trinidad Gerardo.
What's up, everybody?
Our long lost friend is back. We are so happy to have him. We were hoping to have him last week. He was not able to be here. Dude, you're short.
I am.
You're gonna have to
Either that, I'm just really heavy in this chair.
We're gonna have to work on that.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to work on that camera angle. Hey, for those of you who are joining us, this is the Discipleship Begins at Home podcast. It is a ministry of the Next Generation Ministries. You can find out more about us in the website above, thenextgenerationministries.com, and from those places, you can get one of these nice blueprints that are back here. We have the Discipleship for Life blueprint. We have the 5-year plan. Discipleship for Life blueprint is designed for your children who are younger than 5th grade, where you're starting this discipleship process. The 5-year plan are for those of you who are starting the discipleship process with your children older than 6th grade and older. And so we want to provide for you guys an accessible means of knowing that you're doing everything that you can as a parent to disciple your children in the Lord. And so what do you guys think of the new digs? We're kind of moving around, checking out some new things. We got a new countdown timer. You're going to see some upgrades that are going on. Comment below as to what you like about those things. It's really, really cool. Today we are going to tackle the subject of education. Actually, we're going to be doing that for the next 3 weeks. And so this week, we're asking the question, we're going to focus mainly on the public school system, the charter school system, and we're going to be asking ourselves as Christians, should I keep my children in the public school, in the charter school system? We have a lot of things to talk about concerning that. I know it's something me and Trinidad over the last couple of weeks have been researching and talking about. I mean, and it's really a hot topic right now, just because with COVID came information. Mm-hmm. And what happened with that information is a lot of parents who were unaware of what was going on in the classroom now had the classroom brought into their home, and they could see what was being taught and what things were going on. And so what we've been seeing all across the country are a lot of upset parents concerning many of the issues that have been brought up. The largest among them are the big things you're seeing is the CRT, the critical race theory, which is also known as DEI or DIE, which stands for diversity, inclusion, and equity. They're basically the same type of thing. And so whenever you see those types of terms, I don't want to say they're interchangeable, but they're related. Let's just put it that way. Yeah. And so they cover a lot of the same ground. And so we're seeing this push in that, and it begs this question as to whether or not our children ought to be in those school systems. And really, what we would like to kind of talk about is the sharing of us, growing up and also seeing our kids in the middle of all of this. And so, Trinidad, why don't you talk about a little bit concerning that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we were discussing as we were researching and trying to bring up topics to you all is that, what more important topic is what we went through growing up and our kids. For me, I'm originally from California, and I apologize for that. But, went through the California school system. My father was in the military, ended up overseas in Japan going to school. But through that, growing up, we were always raised to say education. Education was always the main thing. Finish high school, go to college, find yourself a good job. That was how we were taught. I was not a believer back then. So learning all these things and then finally becoming a believer and seeing how the school system, the public school system is pretty much not that great. They don't, I remember doing the Pledge of Allegiance and certain times we would do prayer, but most of the time we wouldn't do any of that. We were taught evolution in school. Sex education was a big part of my public school career, I guess you can say. So a lot of that was happening already. I just didn't notice. You thought it was a regular thing that was done. So fast forward, I have 3 kids. My wife and I, that's how we were raised. School education is very important. So we were on that path, telling our kids, forcing them, you got to go to school, you got to do your homework every day, you got to finish school, go to college. But when we became Christians and we ended up at our church at Heights, and Jeremy, I still remember the sermon, and the main point I got out of it was, in order for our kids to have a biblical worldview, they need to know Jesus Christ first. And if they don't know him first, then everything else it does not matter, So we changed our attitude during that time, and then our two oldest were eventually going to public school for a while. And then we finally realized that when our younger daughter we put her into kindergarten and everything, she was not happy. She was getting bullied in school, I can say. The teachers were up to standards of teaching her or anything like that. And we just didn't feel that was right for her. So after we discussed, we prayed about it, and Jeremy was right. Our kids need to know Christ first. But in order for them to do that, we had to take them out of public school. Our son, he finished out his last year of senior, homeschooled. Our daughter, somewhere around 9th, 10th grade is where we took her out and we brought her home. But our youngest daughter has been homeschooled ever since kindergarten. And we've taught them that the most important thing to learn is the Lord. Everything else, that doesn't really matter. If you don't know Christ, you don't know anything.
And I think that's, when we talk about those of you who are watching this podcast, I think most of you are going to be in that same boat, no matter where your kids are at, that we want our kids to know Jesus first. And so, thinking back to me growing up, I remember, it was a lot about the subjects. Yeah. So history was about history. Didn't seem like there was a lot of politicization of the subject matter. Whereas I think we've seen that transforming over the years.
Yeah.
So when we went to history, we weren't getting a skewed type of history. When we were, doing math, it's just math, right? If we're doing English, we're doing English assignments that were many of the classics that were out there. And so I don't remember a whole lot. There was sex education, but you could sign in to be a part of it, and parents could sign you out and not to have to be a part of something like that. And so there was a lot of parental involvement that was encouraged as well as expected, quite honestly, when we were growing up. There seems to be a shift that's happening, because I think about my kids. And my children went to, my youngest daughter went to school for a couple of years before we started homeschooling. Now, we started homeschooling not because of a Christian conviction. We started homeschooling as far as the school system itself is concerned, I should add. But we started homeschooling because my schedule's crazy. And in order for me to have time with my kids, we blinked and 2 years was gone, just like that. And so we decided we wanted to homeschool so that we would have the most time with our kids. After about 5 years of homeschooling, my wife wanted a break from all the homeschooling. So we did enroll our kids for 1 year in the public school system, 7th, 5th, and 3rd grade respectively for my kids. And, we took the opportunity to share Christ with them, be very intentional concerning their relationship with Jesus during this time. But there were changes that we saw in our kids during that time that we're, after that 1 year, my wife said, I'm reset, I'm ready to go. And we homeschooled them all the way through from there. But I remember my son wanted to go to a STEM charter school. And so it was a nice charter school that was in town. We had interviewed, and he's like, I really want to do this. This would be great. And he was trying to go into, I believe it was 8th grade and into it. And we said, well, if you can get in there, that would be great. And this is around 2014, 2015. And we said, if you don't get in, then we're going to homeschool you, obviously, the rest of the way. But I did mention one thing to him, because at this time, these shoes hadn't dropped yet. I told my son that if, we have 2015 is when all of this got signed into play. If the transgender roles allowed men or women or guys and girls to go into the opposite bathrooms, you will never go to public school again until you're graduated. And it hadn't happened at the time that he was trying for the STEM program, but there was such a long waiting list that he didn't get in, which I see as a blessing, because the very next year, the very next school year, when he would have been in 8th grade, is when they dropped that down. And so we have things that have changed as a result of that. And so it's not the same school system. I wish I could say it was. And I'm not saying that every public school system is as terrible as maybe the ones that we're going to. We're not trying to assume that every one of them is bad, but enough of them have hidden many things that are going on in the classroom. Yeah. And we've seen the fruit. I've been a youth pastor for 20 years, and I can tell you that what it used to be is evolution. Evolution was mentioned in a number of different classes, and it seemed like that was the subject that would really hit on the faith of many youth who would walk in. And it wouldn't be just talked about in science, it would be talked about in other classes as well. Well, that has shifted to things about race and gender and identity. Those are the things that we're seeing moving in that direction. As a matter of fact, when 2015 dropped, and I'm a youth pastor at my church, I actually had some students who were going to a charter school at the time, saying that what had happened was they would have one guy who would go into the girls' bathroom and just sit in the bathroom during breaks because he identified himself as a girl, and therefore he wouldn't go anyplace else. He wasn't doing anything else. He'd literally go in there and just sit for the entire breaks. And they felt violated, quite honestly. They felt like they didn't have any place of privacy concerning that. So we have seen a huge shift as it pertains to public education and how it pertains to even how our children interact with one another. And it really brings a cause to pause concerning this idea of, should my children even be in public schools to begin with? And so what we want to do real quick is just kind of share some stories, not to scare you or anything like that. We live in the New Mexico area, and Albuquerque public school system. Their viewpoint concerning how people interact at school, as far as transitioning goes and stuff like that, transgenderism and the like, they allow those students into the bathroom of their choice, into the locker room of their choice, based upon what gender they identify as. And so it's important for you guys to understand that, because this is the environment that, if you're in a public school system, that you're sending your son or daughter to. And it really does. And it's not just a matter of having to deal with that in the bathroom. It's also having to deal with that in the classroom. Yeah. And so I know we have some articles that we want to kind of let you guys know about. Trinidad's got one from Mark Cahill that he wants to share with you concerning some of these things that are happening. Like I said, it's not just in the bathrooms, it's in the classrooms as well. And why is that important? We're going to talk about that in just a little bit.
Yeah, Mark Cahill, I don't know if some of you know, he is a pastor, and he sent out an article not too long ago. The title is "Get Them Out of Government Schools," and pretty much that's what we're here to talk about. And one of the things in this article talks about a mother and a daughter. The school was trying to teach her how to bind herself to make her look male. So they never told the mother what they were doing. It was basically a secret. But the daughter, knowing something was wrong, ended up telling her mother, and then it came into a big court case. But one of the things Mark Cahill writes in this, and it's pretty straightforward type things. He says, the education system wants to own your kids so they can mold and shape them into the image they want them to have rather than after the image of God. What does this tell you? Get your kids out of the system. So that's pretty straightforward right there. And you have to see these things for what they really are. Again, Jeremy mentioned how the pandemic pointed everything out.
Kind of pulled the classroom into our houses, right? Into our homes.
Yeah. And you got to realize that, as my son says, he sees this as a good thing, the pandemic. Some may not see it that way, but he sees it as a good thing because God brought to light a bunch of things.
Absolutely.
So this was one of them. There's so many others, but we'll talk about that maybe some other time. But this is the main thing. We got a lot of requests if we would do a podcast on this, and from people we know, but seeing it, how it's becoming more in your face in this past couple years, that it's just something on our hearts because we've lived through it and we've seen it. So
well, and there's always this argumentation that, I want my child, because my child's a Christian, to be an example to those who don't know Jesus Christ.
Right.
And I want to share with you an article that Matt Walsh wrote back in 2017. This was, back in the early days when this law had just gotten through there. And the problem with it is that your child, and the title of the article is, let me get that real quick. Christian parents, your kids aren't equipped to be public school missionaries. And he's absolutely right. And but he gives some reasonings on here, and I want to read a decent portion of his article just because I think what it does, I want you guys to listen to the argumentation that he brings forth, and think about your kids. Think about what they know of Jesus. What can they truly convey of Christ? And realizing that they're being taught and inundated, even by their teachers, into non-biblical thinking. Okay, and so I'm going to start about halfway through his article. This is his third point. It says, "Yes, my kids will eventually be exposed to all kinds of strange and terrible things. As much as I like to keep them shielded from the evils of the world forever, I know that I can't do such a thing. The question is not whether our kids will be exposed to this or that depravity, but when and how, in what context. Are you prepared to trust the school's judgment on when Junior is ready to learn about concepts like transgenderism? Do you trust their judgment on how he learns it and what he's told about it? If you do, I suppose you're not even reading this post right now because you've been in a vegetative state for the past 30 years. Fourth, when a kid is sent to public school, he's expected to navigate and survive and thrive in a hostile, confusing, amoral environment, basically untethered from his parents, 6 to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 9 months a year for 12 years. Is a child ready for that challenge by the time he's 5 years old? Is he ready at 8, at 10? No, our job as parents is to train them up in the way they should go, equip them with the armor of God, fortify them in truth, and then release them to the world. That process has not been completed in conjunction with them first learning how to tie their shoes. I mean, for goodness sake, most adults can't even manage to withstand the hostilities and pressures of our fallen world for that amount of time. And we expect little kids to do it? That's not fair to them. It's too much to ask, way too much. They aren't equipped. They're not ready. They're not strong enough, and they will get eaten alive. Let's just take one example of gender insanity. Our kids in public schools will be in a world where concepts like transgenderism and demigenderism are normal, healthy, cool, and rational. Remember, he's writing this in 2017 where it hasn't become totally normalized yet. That's 5 years ago. They'll be in a world where even recognizing basic biological realities is considered bigoted and oppressive. It's like he's prophetic, right? Seriously. They'll be in this environment literally from their first day in kindergarten. Can a child spend his entire young life in such an atmosphere and emerge on the other end with his head still on straight? It's possible, I suppose, but you've never had to do that. I didn't have to do it. I went to public school, but it wasn't as bad as it is now. I would be asking my kids to live up to a spiritual and mental and moral challenge that I myself have never endured. I'll be asking them to do it every day for 12 years, starting sometime around their 5th birthday. Not fair, just not fair. Think about this. what's more likely to happen? That you bring your child into this type of learning environment, and after 12 years, when they go in at 5 years old, or 13 years actually, because kindergarten is the 13th year, right? So after 13 years of being in this public school system, are they going to more likely share the world's values that's being taught in the school, or your values that's being taught at home? Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing is, by far, it's the world's values. It's not even close.
Yeah.
And what's so sad and what's so heartbreaking about it is that our children are the ones who suffer for it, right? They're the ones who are bearing the brunt of these false ideologies being foisted upon them in a way that we don't even teach them about the Bible. And that is a dangerous proposition. It really, really is. If you're hoping that your kid's faith is going to come out intact, we're not seeing that. We haven't seen that. We can look back for the last 20, 30 years, and we're seeing a greater fall away rate of the faith right now than we ever have before, right? And from faithful families who are saying, I don't understand why my kids have fallen away like this, what's happened as a result of my kids. Matt Walsh ends his article by saying this: related to the last point, your child is not ready to be a missionary. He cannot be a witness to others until he himself has been properly formed in the faith. It's no surprise that most of the young missionaries we commission to send forth to minister to lost souls in public schools quickly become one of the lost souls. We don't need to sit around theorizing about whether the missionary approach to education is wise or effective. We already know that it isn't. The vast majority of the parents who think their kids are being salt and light to their peers in school are simply oblivious to the fact that their little Bible warriors have long since defected and joined the heathens. You can hardly blame the kids for this. They're just kids after all. They aren't warriors. Warriors are trained and disciplined. Children are neither of those things. I imagine why this is why St. Paul didn't travel to Athens and Corinth recruiting toddlers to help him carry the gospel into pagan lands. Oh. Education is supposed to prepare a child to carry the torch of truth. That is, he's supposed to be ready to carry it once his education has been completed. This should not be a throw them into the deep end and see if they can swim strategy. They can't swim. You and I can barely swim, morally and spiritually speaking, and we're adults. Do you expect your child to be more spiritually mature and morally courageous than you? Right? So this is the quandary that we find ourselves in. Like I said, we didn't have to face this as parents. This is what we're facing right now with our kids. There was an interview, and it was one of Alicia Childers' interview in the recent past. I want to say it might have been the guy from Summit Ministries, Jeff Myers, I believe. Oh, yes. I think that's what it was. I'm not 100% sure on that, but it was one of her recent ones. And she was talking about how, what were the predominant factors of people falling away from faith, back in the 90s. And they had done a study on this, and the three factors for predominantly falling away from faith or not coming to faith in Jesus Christ was, number one was pornography use. Number two was drug and alcohol use. And number three was cohabitating, living together before marriage. Now, two of those three have to do with sexual deviancy, right? Whether you're viewing it or you're actively a part of it in the other one. Can you imagine how much worse it is today when now we have the acceptance of homosexuality, which we didn't have in the 1990s. The acceptance of transgenderism, which we didn't have in the 1990s. So much has changed. And these are now called identities. These aren't merely sins. We just did a series, a 5-part series on sin. It was very important that we talked about sin in the right way concerning the Word of God, because what the culture is doing is trying to make sin something somebody identifies with. It's part of my person, rather than my sin is an action. It's an act. It's an attitude that separates me from God. Yeah. And so it's something that God has said no to. And though I may have a tendency to lean in that direction because I'm a sinful human being, it is wrong and I shouldn't indulge in those things. Well, now they're being told that it's a part of who they are, and nobody can tell you that you're not this. Okay? And so they've broken down the barrier of truth concerning these things. If beforehand, 30 years ago, it's hard to say 30 years ago in the 1990s. Can I just tell you that that's a rough thing for me right now?
I don't want to hear it either, because we're already past that.
So, but 30 years ago, these were the biggest factors. 2 of the 3 were were sexually charged things. And this is why it talks about in the Bible that he who sins against he who sins with his body, it's a worse thing, because all the other sins are outside of your body. Mm-hmm. But when one sins sexually, you're sinning against your body. And now we have a whole generation whose sin against the body is something that they're proclaiming as their identity. And by proclaiming it as their identity, it's something they don't want to give up to follow Jesus, because in Christ, that's where our identity is found.
Okay.
My identity, Trinidad's identity, is found in Jesus Christ. And the problem that we're looking at in our current system right now is that these sexual sins, which seem to be the ones where people push back the hardest on saying, I don't want anything to do with Jesus because I know people who are homosexual. I'm a homosexual. I don't know what gender I am. Mm-hmm. I mean, seriously, these are the things that people are talking about. I don't believe that there's just male and female. I think God is bigoted for these things, because we're setting up a sexual ideology that is in conflict with a biblical worldview.
Yeah, we can go to just recent news within the past week. Mm-hmm. You have a Supreme Court justice nominee who cannot define what a woman is. It goes back to sexuality.
Yep.
That's everything in the Bible. It's always mentioned, don't be sexually immoral. So everything goes back to that. I mean, we can go now to everything being taught. CRT, transgenderism, what's the other one?
The diversity, inclusion, and equity.
Everything that you're hearing is being taught in the public school system. It's all there.
And all of them have a sexual agenda to it. Mm-hmm. CRT, if you go to Black Lives, or if you went, they've scrubbed their site so many times since then. But if you go to Black Lives Matter, it's not Black Lives Matter. It's Black Queer Lives Matter, or Black Homosexual Lives Matter, or Black Transgender Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. It's really not about the nuclear family. As a matter of fact, they were against the nuclear family. And so every one of these things are pushing our kids in the direction toward making their sexuality their new God, their identity in and of themselves, which is exactly opposite concerning what the Word of God would say for your children, for my children. Yeah. But once they have stepped into that role, it's hard for them to let go. Yeah. And that's a dangerous proposition for us as parents to think that they will not grab onto something so powerful, so emotionally and physically powerful as a sexual identity. One of the things that happened back in 2010 when New Mexico was considering their first push on accepting homosexual unions in the state, I wrote to the senators at the time from HB 21 and SB 12, and I told them, what you're doing is you're setting up a conflict between freedom of religion, and of course I'm a Christian, right? Between freedom of religion and sexual preference. And you're going to choose one or the other. Mm. And our society is choosing more and more, especially for our children. It's so important that we understand, especially for our children, they're choosing more and more this sexual identity to replace Christ for the values of our children. And unfortunately, where we see this most pushed is in the public school systems. Like I said, not every public school system is like this, but more and more of them, many who thought they weren't having this problem, all of a sudden you're starting to see that. So if your kids are coming home from public schools and they start talking about these things, realize that they're being taught by their teachers these things. And it's not just a matter of counteracting them. It's a matter of saying, my child is under the influence of somebody whom I am entrusting as a parent to teach them these things. Trinidad was reading a book about We Will Not Be Silenced by Erwin Lutzer, and it had a number of really great quotes in there. I'm going to let him get to that in just a moment because he's got a whole handful of them there. But, Vodi Bakum is one of them who has said something similar to this. It says, look, if you are handing your children over to, Rome, don't be surprised if they come back Romans, right? And it's the same thing. If we're handing our children over to the state, right? And these are the things that the state is teaching in so many different areas, and what they're walking into, and what their other peers are buying into at a much greater rate, then what are the chances they're going to come out unscathed with their faith concerning all of that? It's more likely that they're going to be against many of the things that we're trying to instill in them as parents. So talk about some of the quotes in there from Erwin Lutzer.
Yeah, most of these quotes where I got from were one of the chapters called Sexualizing the Children.
Yep.
I know it sounds bad, but that's what they're doing. So Dr. Erwin Lutzer goes through it, talking about how they're trying to shape our kids' minds and everything. And kind of similar to what Vodi Bakum says, was his saying was, the greater Caesar's role, the greater Caesar's control.
Yep.
So as you see, and you have your kids in the public school system, charter schools, whatever, you're letting your kids be taught by Caesar. So one of the things that Jeremy and I discussed in length was this first quote, I'm going to say, because it's not just, well, let me read it first. So it says, parents, and I include Christian parents, no longer raise their children. Rather, culture does, and most significantly, through the internet. Like one mother said to me, I didn't know that when I gave my 13-year-old daughter a cell phone, I might as well have given her first shot of heroin. That's pretty blunt. Now, as a nation, we have submitted our minds to electronic devices that now shape our thinking and provide endless entertainment. So, and Jeremy brought up something cool. He says, not just the internet. You said it was something else that we were talking about it the other day.
What was I talking about? I don't know what you're saying. I didn't write it down on the notes. So
I know.
That's it, it's I would say the internet is that, but it's all the screens, everything, every
much,
area pushes that. As a matter of fact, there was a quote that I had read recently that talked about, it was online, somebody had posted it, and I wish I could find the original source for it, but it was basically saying that our children have learned more and accepted more of this sexualized agenda through entertainment than any other way in which we have taught. In other words, they go on the shows on television, and the shows on television all have gay characters, or they're starting to introduce transgender characters, and now they're talking about, for example, in the new Lightyear Disney movie, that they're supposed to be giving the backstory of where Buzz Lightyear came from. Well, there's supposed to be a lesbian kiss in the middle of that, so you need to be aware of that as parents. That you can't even go to looking at just a children's movie anymore without this being seen as normalized.
Right.
And so the more that they're exposed to it, the more that it's going to intrigue them to find out more about it. And again, it goes back to Matt Walsh's article, that just because that exists in our society does not mean that before they are trained in that we need to needlessly expose them to that. I'm not talking about that we're confronted with it and we see it at a Walmart where something like that has happened. We're talking about going as an entertainment value, and now we're putting ourselves in that position of having, as a parent, discuss something that our kids don't have a fully formed biblical worldview, even at a very young age, concerning that. Of course, Disney is talking a lot of things concerning that as well.
Yeah.
A couple of those other quotes are really good too.
I have one here. I think this would help a lot. he says here that he remembers talking to Tony Evans.
Oh, yes. That was
He
a
says
great quote.
here, every Christian parent has to pray and search for the best education options for their children. He says, I remember Tony Evans saying that when his children came home from school, he and his wife would discuss what they had learned and deprogram them from any wrong ideas they were taught. Now, I remember, like, my oldest daughter, when they were going to a charter school a few years back, and we were Christians then. She would come home and we would discuss things. We were still in the process of maturing ourselves, so we would come and just talk about things and kind of tell her, well, do you think that's right? What does the Bible say about this? Because we're in the process of learning too, like I was saying. Now, our youngest daughter, we homeschool. Now, as Jeremy was saying, they have all these movies now, and when we watch a certain movie, we break it down to what was wrong with this movie? What was they talking about? What do you think their main message was? Yep. So you have to pretty much, not just from the public school system, but from every type of thing in life now, from movies to books, TV shows, videos on YouTube, everything like that has to be broken down to where you have to deprogram them on everything.
It's exhausting. It really is.
It can be, yeah.
It's Beckett Cook. We went to conference, the reality conference. It was fantastic, by the way. And encourage any of you who are thinking of, if you've got a reality conference near you to be a part of, please be a part of that conference. It's an amazing conference that really tackles a lot of these issues from a biblical perspective. But Beckett Cook began talking about his own journey. He's somebody who came from the homosexual lifestyle and has come to Christ. And he said, you know what, being in that entertainment industry, if I find myself watching a movie, I need to be willing to spend that much time reading the Bible afterwards, because I have found myself, I'm watching a movie, I've been lied to for 2 hours, right? That wasn't my words; those are his. Yeah. But there's a subtle teaching that's happening underneath all of that, and how this relates to public schools and charter schools is this: that secular environment is something your child doesn't get away from if they're going to school 8 hours a day, right? Yeah. They're not away from that. All of that entertainment, all of those friends that they're going to have, where most of them are not going to be believers in Christ. Most of those people are not going to encourage their faith. So even in their times off, guess what they're being encouraged to do? Things that probably you as parents don't want them to do. What are they talking about? They're probably talking about issues that they're not fully formed in Christ concerning that. And so what I would like to do for these last couple of minutes, is, what should we do about the public school system? Our goal as a parent is to make sure that our children are discipled in the Lord. I mean, Luke 9, 23 through 26. That's got to be the most important goal for us as parents. Does the school system bolster or subvert our goal of discipleship in our children? I think when we talk about the public school system, I think when we talk about, in general, the charter school system, I think that the general consensus is going to be, no, it doesn't. No, it's not there to bolster the faith of my child, and oftentimes subverts it. Like I said, this is a generalized statement. There might be some good ones that are out there. So what do we do if we find ourselves as a parent in this position, knowing that these very things, the CRT, the diversity, inclusion, and equity, the transgender and the sexuality that's out there, that's being foisted upon our kids, are there to specifically subvert their faith in Jesus Christ? How are you and I as parents supposed to combat that with our kids? We could do as Tony Evans did, is sit down every day and deprogram them for however long it's going to take. But the longer they're in that environment, the more approval it seems like we're giving as parents. And I think that that's a big thing to really consider. Tony Evans' kids, no offense, but Tony Evans is older than I am. So his kids were growing up probably in the 90s, right? So we're looking in the 90s when those things were bad. He was deprogramming them then. There's so much more to deprogram them through now.
Yeah.
And so how should we do this? How should we react to this? my encouragement for you guys is, number one, you got to be in the Word.
Got
The
it.
first thing is this: you have to be in the Word. If you don't know where to begin, that's why these blueprints right here are created. Not only do these blueprints have a Bible reading plan that's going to challenge your kids at an age-appropriate level, but they have books in the back that hit on these very issues that we're talking about, all these resources that you as parents can say, okay, here's a resource my child can read, can understand. At minimum, you guys need to be doing that. But I think that a larger thing that you need to do is to consider what Trinidad did. Consider what I did, is to pull your kids out of the public school system, out of the charter school system, out of an environment that is so antithetical to your Christian faith. So what do we want to do instead? How can we do something like that? Well, I want to give you guys some hope and some ideas of to be thinking about. I know where are we at? End of March right now?
Yeah.
So we're not thinking about this year. We're thinking about next year, okay? Because your kids are in school. They're going to finish out the school year. You got a couple months that are left. But as far as next year is concerned, consider like partnering up with another homeschool family and have them taking care of your kids and walking them through, a time of education where you might not be able to do that. Maybe you're a single mom. Maybe you're a two-parent family and you're just struggling to get by. And you're like, we don't know where we would find that time. Totally understand that. And so if that's the case, see if there are any other homeschool families within your church that would be willing to let you kind of join in with them. If you have the means, you might want to consider a good Christian school. But we're going to talk about Christian schools next week. So they're not off the hook just because they're a Christian school. We're going to talk about that. And we're really excited about sharing that with you. But think about getting them involved in a Christian school. Think about homeschooling them yourself. Some of you might be saying, well, that's going to be a change of lifestyle. Absolutely it is. It was for us.
Yeah, it was big time for us.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about homeschooling too. So.
Yeah, I mean, the thing was, like, my wife does most of the homeschooling, but she always tells new homeschoolers, don't be afraid to outsource.
Yeah.
Right? Because all you have to do is research. It might take a while, but there are a lot of Christian teachers out there who do homeschooling,
and we're gonna be a lot more extensive in that in not the next session, but the session after that. So we're gonna talk about Christian schools, and then we're gonna talk about homeschools, and so we're gonna get a lot more into that. But it was a huge lifestyle change for me and my wife.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something. I'm not looking at the educational opportunities as something they're missing out on. I want my children to know Jesus.
That's right.
My children need to know Jesus. That's the number one reason why I would pull them out of the schools. Is that if the school system is against my child's faith development in Jesus Christ, my child has no business being in that place, and is worth any sacrifice that I would give as a father, as a spiritual leader of my family, to make sure that my son, that my daughter would be in an environment that would foster their faith until such time that they are equipped enough to go out in the world and be that missionary for Jesus Christ, to be that evangelist for Jesus. But they're not there at 5, they're not there at 10, and I would dare say even at high school age, where we're at right now, I'm not sure they're there either.
Yeah,
honestly.
My 13-year-old daughter, we know she's not ready yet. I mean, there's still teaching involved in here, but it's not going to be from the public school system. It's going to be strictly from the Bible and what we as parents want her to learn and to know, which is Jesus Christ, because that's the only truth out there and nothing else.
And so that's what we want to encourage you guys with. There are options out there for you. So we don't want to just say, oh, public school is terrible, public school is bad. It is. These are the challenges they're really facing. And if you're trying to make a case that it's the same as when you grew up, it's totally not. It's not the same as when we grew up. It's not the same even as Tony Evans' kids were growing up. It's so different now than even what you remember. And it's affecting our kids in a way that we don't really understand because we haven't been put in that environment. So let's not have our kids grow up in that environment. And let's protect our kids and protect our kids' faith. Yeah. Write in the comments, talk about, some of the options that maybe we didn't mention that are out there for those of you in public schools. What are your biggest challenges at public school? What are the things that are out there that we might be able to help you guys with, to think outside of the box, to find this type of education? The beauty of living in our internet age is, while it does open up a Pandora's box of problems, there are also more solutions than there ever have been before. And so don't be afraid of using those solutions. We're so thankful to be a part of all of this. We look forward to talking about Christian schools, so buckle up in a couple of weeks as we step into the Christian schools and talk about their pluses, their minuses, and whether that might be the right decision for you and your family to step into, and how to continue discipling your kids, even if they're going to a Christian school. That's it for right now. So God bless you guys. Go to nextgenerationministries.com. We are available to speak at your church, to talk about helping parents connect with their teenagers, to make you guys the disciplers of your kids, helping pastors connect with you as parents so that they could be a part of what God's called them to do, and equipping you for your work of service with your children. So we love to do that. So check us out there and invite us over. We'd love to be there for that. But until next time, God bless you.
God bless you.
We'll talk to you then.